today to celebrate the life of Steve Strauss. I know that those that could not be with us today are here in spirit, whether it be a colleague, student, alumna, friend, or family member. We gather to celebrate the wonderful life that Steve had. It is my pleasure to introduce Father Joe Newman from St. Francis de Sales High School.
We'll begin with a prayer. Almighty God, we are here to celebrate the life of Stephen, who's had a great impact on our lives. You promised us that you would wipe away every tear from our eyes, and so fill our minds with the memories that bring us joy, and those moments with Stephen that bring gladness to our hearts. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
It's my pleasure to introduce Fox-Strauss, who will give a reflection.
Hi, everyone. At 24 years old, Steve taught 7th and 8th grade Latin at Hathaway Brown in Shaker Heights, Ohio. He and my mom only had answering machines at that time, and as you can imagine, their machine was filled with prank calls and giggling on the weekends when his students would be having sleepovers. My mom said that you'd be surprised at the number of middle school trick-or-treaters that they received that year. When my mom went in to visit him at school, a bunch of girls ran up to her and started laughing and pointing at my dad and telling my mom to call him Dr. Seuss. She asked him, "Why do they call you that?" Naturally. He responded, laughing, and said, "I don't know and I can't get them to stop." When they were discussing whether or not they were going to have children, he said to my mom, "I've always pictured myself as kind of the dorky, out-of-it dad of a couple of girls." So that's what he kind of became. He loved to be weird just to get us to tease him or laugh at him. He always kept his expectations low, not because he was a pessimist, but because he was able to find joy even within the most seemingly boring moments. He would watch almost any movie and never claim that it was a waste of time because he knew that he would find something about it that he enjoyed. When he made dinners, he would listen to the weirdest mix of music, ranging from Demi Lovato and Taylor Swift, to Broadway musicals, to 80s pop, and even Meatloaf. I cannot tell you how many times we laughed as we poorly sang along to the new Beauty and the Beast soundtrack together. One time I questioned his choice of music this summer when he was listening to Cool for the Summer by Demi Lovato, and his response was only, "Well, I mean, yeah, she's just so sassy in this song." He almost had no capacity to be embarrassed. Even in his classes at Notre Dame, he made dumb jokes even when he knew no one would laugh because he knew the students still loved it when he was a dork. He loved life and enjoyed every minute more than anyone else I knew. He was the definition of a life lived to the fullest since he literally never slept. We've been finding books upon journals, upon hidden hobbies while sifting through his things, which leaves us asking each other and ourselves, how did he even have time for all of this? Though he was most certainly too young, one could easily say that he still got his money's worth in the time that he was alive. As my mom says it, he was always up for absolutely anything. He may have been an introvert, but he obviously wasn't shy, with lots of photographic evidence of him in different costumes at pep rallies. I remember my senior year when I was on the hip-hop team, a few of the male faculty members were more than willing, almost to a concerning level, to dance along to the Justin Bieber Christmas mashup along with our team on stage. My dad was one of those men. I don't remember much about the assembly otherwise, but in the middle of the dance, one of my most cherished and memorable moments at NDA happened. My dad turned his head back to me in the middle of the dance, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Embarrassing himself in front of all the students and all of his coworkers, he was smiling so hard he looked as though his heart could just burst right there front and center stage. He was always looking for an opportunity to learn or teach. He took almost every chance he could to read a new book about the Roman Empire or even just about the importance of salt. My friend Shannon reminded me the other day of a time during our freshman year of high school that he drove a few of us to Cedar Point and just spent the day sitting by the water and contently reading for hours while he waited for us to be done in the park. One of my childhood best friends reached out to me after she heard the news. She reminded me of the day when we were little and we woke up early in the morning at our house in Amagansett, and he took the two of us to get danishes and eat them in the graveyard. She said it was foggy and that the sun was coming up, and that he sat there and told us about some of the people that were laid to rest there. She told me that it was the first time that someone had ever made her face death as something neither bad nor good, just something that existed, not something that she had to spend her whole life preparing for. He took his own advice in that last year and a half and kept things business as usual. The only change he made to his lifestyle was taking his illness as an opportunity to travel more and spend more time on himself. Overall, he was always content with the way things were. I never once heard him complain about a situation, and he didn't have a bad thing to say about anyone he ever met. He was a moral compass for everyone, even those of us that lived with him every day would still find ourselves asking one another, what would Steve do? He had his first stroke just after the final World Cup game ended, so naturally, our family having strong Croatian roots, my older brother still blames France for my dad's death. After that, the situation only got worse, but he remained so calm. He didn't even want people to be around him in the hospital because he didn't want people to fuss over him or worry. When I flew to New York to see him after I heard about the second stroke, I had to take an Uber from LaGuardia Airport to the hospital that he was in. I swear my Uber driver, Byron, was channeling my dad. From the second I got in the car, we talked about every detail that had to do with life and death and everything in between. I told him about my dad's entire journey over the last year and a half, admittedly peppering in some bragging about how close we are and how amazing he is. My driver told me over and over again, no matter what happens, it sounds like your dad has left you very well prepared. I know you'll continue to make him proud because you're such a strong young woman. He then told me that he hoped that our time in the car together, which was at least an hour and 45 minutes, made me feel less nervous about whatever I was about to encounter at the hospital. Upon arrival, I was taken into a room and told that I was never going to talk to him again, and that there was no chance of recovery. I said to my mom that I was so angry that I couldn't say goodbye to him, and she said, "You don't have to say goodbye because we were always so good to each other all the time." My grandma also put it this way, "You've already said goodbye in so many ways." I feel lucky to stand here today and have no regrets about our relationship. I got the chance to be best friends with my parents, and that's the best gift I could ever ask for. I live a better life every single day because of him. People keep asking me how I'm doing, and though the answer is usually, I'm working through it as best I can, it's also easy to be honest and say that I feel okay with it a lot of the time, because I think that my Uber driver was right when he said that it sounded like he left us so well prepared to handle anything. Running the risk of being cliche, I'm going to include a quote, but I think it's appropriate for today. Anne Frank wrote, "I don't think of all the misery, but of all the beauty that remains." This doesn't mean we have to be okay, definitely doesn't mean to actively avoid the waves of sadness that will inevitably come. I just like to translate it to finding joy in the impressions that he left on us, and truly using today and every day as a day to celebrate him. My family and I thank Notre Dame especially for giving him the career of a lifetime and for allowing him to actually be the dorky dad that he pictured himself to be for hundreds of girls for over 20 years. Thank you.
This is a reading from Seneca, a Roman philosopher. In the presence of death, we must continue to sing the song of life. We must be able to accept death and go from its presence, better able to hear our burdens and to lighten the load of others. Out of our sorrows should come understanding. Through our sorrows, we join with all those before who have had to suffer, and all those who will yet have to do so. Let us not be gripped by the fear of death. If another day be added to our lives, let us joyfully receive it, but let us not anxiously depend on our tomorrows. Though we grieve the deaths of our loved ones, we accept them and hold on to our memories as precious gifts. Let us make the best of our loved ones while they are with us, and let us not bury our love with death. It's my pleasure to introduce Gloria Dinos, a friend and colleague of Steve.
As many of you know, Steve was not only my colleague and friend, but mostly my traveling companion. Again, welcome to this celebration of his life. Thank you, Christine and Ann, for allowing Steve's NDA family to come together and mourn his death and share in the gift that he was to so many people. Thank you, too, for asking me to share some reflections about the friend Steve was, and I hope I can do his memory justice in these words I share. Ancient Egyptians believed that at the end of our lives we should ask ourselves two questions. The first question was, did you bring joy? And the second was, did you find joy? As I have thought about Steve these past days, and all the things I so admired and respected about him, I'm so sorry. I would answer these two questions like this. Did he bring joy? Absolutely he did. A resounding yes. In his quiet, thoughtful way, Steve brought joy to the people who knew him. He may not have recognized it as such, but as I thought about Steve, it was joy that he shared. His knowledge about his subject matter, his love of reading, his subtle sense of humor. I doubt that anyone here does not have some memory or story of Steve that they could share. If you use social media or looked at social media over these last several weeks, there were so many comments and so many things shared. I could compile an entire book of the many memories and the ways that Steve brought joy to those who left messages there. I can't imagine that those who knew Steve don't have memories of the quiet ways he gave joy to them. I was thinking about the first trip I took with him. He usually traveled alone when he went to Italy, kind of under the radar, if you will. He'd take anywhere from 6 to 20 students with him. I'd gone on 2 trips at that point, and then learned of Steve's upcoming trip to Italy. I wanted to go to Italy, so I went up to his room one day after school, and I said, I know you're going there. Don't you think I could come along? I don't know if Steve was really surprised, but I do think he was a little shocked that someone would ask him that. But I can't tell you the joy I felt when he responded, yeah, why not? That trip was also the beginning of my many years of travel with Steve and my friendship with him. I have so many memories of those trips and all that he taught the students that traveled with us. There are many of you probably in this room. Our trips grew and many adventures were added. The joy I experienced when we first traveled to Greece. I even think of the joy Steve received in finding more historical sites to stomp around in that were not in Italy. I would ask Steve where he'd gone when he had free time, and we'd go off on our own or with the girls somewhere, and he'd point somewhere over there and say, oh, I just walked up that little hill over there. And you'd look over where he was pointing, and there'd be this gigantic mountain. His hills were everyone else's mountains. His famous line whenever he was taking us somewhere in our free time was always, oh, it's just a little bit further. No problem, just a little bit further. He might fail to tell you how many steps you'd have to take or how many steps you'd have to climb, if there were any rest places on the way. But with his encouragement, we'd always find the joy he shared in what he believed to be a special site or place. There were so many ways that Steve brought joy, and I would suggest that as you sit here thinking about him, there would be many more that you could think of as well. Who can't remember his dancing, as Anne shared, at school, dressing up for Halloween, his subtle jokes. The joy and laughter Steve shared was precious to everyone who knew him. The second question I would answer on Steve's behalf, did he receive joy, would also be a resounding yes. I think Steve did receive joy from those who loved and knew him as friends, students, colleagues. His wonderful wife, Christine, and his 2 beautiful children, Christopher and Anne, they were the ones that knew him best and knew his joys and what delighted him. I especially enjoyed the 2 trips we took when Anne traveled with us and I was able to witness their special bond. There were so many ways that joy was given to him. While he was a man of few words, if you were blessed enough to know, you knew what gave him joy and fulfillment. Every time we arrived in Pompeii, Italy, Steve could not wait to see what new excavations had been uncovered, and off he would go while the rest of us had to go through the tour. Not to be seen for many hours would Steve be. Eventually, someone in the group would look up and notice that he was gone. And they'd say, "Where's Mr. Strauss?" I'd simply tell them that he was off checking out the new places that were not open to us. And because I have to keep this short, the last thing I'll mention about Steve would be his endless pile of notes and stickies that he would put everywhere. He had more notes in his pockets than I probably had in a book. And I'd always ask him if he remembered or had a place that he put a certain message or something that we needed to remember. When I asked him how he kept track of all of them, he always told me he knew exactly where everyone was and what they were about. He received the joy of his pen and paper, reminding him of whatever he needed to remember at the time and place he found himself in. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail." I don't believe Steve followed any path but his own. His life was the life he wanted. Everything about him reflected this. Steve went where there was no path and left his trail for many to remember. This day our hearts are heavy for losing someone so special. But as we mourn his death, we also celebrate his life. Rest in peace, my friend. Safe travels.
Okay, next we'll have Father Joe.
We'll have a reading from the book of Sirach. Happy the man who meditates on wisdom and reflects on knowledge, who ponders her ways in his heart and understands her paths, who pursues her like a scout and lies in wait at her entryway, who peers through her windows and listens at her doors, who encamps near her house and fastens his tent pegs next to her walls, pitches his tent beside her and lives as her welcome neighbor, who builds his nest in her leafage and lodges in her branches, who takes shelter with her from the heat and dwells in her home. As I come here today, I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Steve, but I can tell you as I look out, the greatest hope of a teacher has been achieved today. That great hope that what you do in the classroom matters. It's our greatest hope as a teacher myself. You want those days to matter. And it looks like the love that he had for his subject, the love that he had for his students was infectious. And that's why you're here, that you caught it. You caught that love. And, just as Anne said in her conclusion, in her quote, that love is beautiful. It is. I traveled to a service works out in Camden, New Jersey a few years ago, and on a building, all the 3 of the walls were already dismantled, torn down, but on its remaining wall there was a mural that said, "Beauty saves." And I think the love that Steve had for his subject and for his students, that infectious love, it communicated to us something that was beautiful. And beauty saves. And we're here today because Steve saved us. May God be praised.
Next, we'll hear from Maddie Parks, a 15 graduate. As Christine and Ann said, Maddie was one of those students that got his humor.
privilege of being in Mr. Strauss's class for 4 years, and I can honestly say I had some of the best memories from high school in room 306. It may have been a long, sweaty trip up those stairs every other day, as my class was the last to leave before Notre Dame decided to get air conditioning, but I wouldn't change a thing. In fact, I was usually excited to walk into that classroom. Was it because I had a passion to learn Latin? Not exactly, but that class made me happy no matter what the day had brought beforehand. I usually had Latin 4th period, and I always walked out in a good mood. Mr. Strauss was hands down the most easygoing person I've ever met, which was perhaps both a blessing and a curse for him. I'm sure we made him crazy most days, but he truly did care about what we were getting out of the class, and did everything in his power to get us to master the basics. That may have been accomplished by bribing us with the possibility of watching Hercules if we focused and completed the work he had turned us loose on. And even though I can probably count on my hand the amount of times we actually got through all of the work he had planned for us for our class period, he always held up his end of the bargain, which is why I can also recite almost every line of Hercules. Other days when the workload was a little less, he entertained us with his humor. The amount of times I would be full out belly laughing is too high to count, and I know everyone who was in class with me would agree. I don't know that he was aware of how much we enjoyed when he would get off topic with us, chiming into our conversations and then realizing we had already lost like 20 minutes of class, talking about things that had zero relation to Latin. I will always remember the day when he told us how he became a Latin teacher. I felt so honored to hear him say that he gave up becoming a lawyer to teach girls like us about something so dear to him. He said that being a lawyer may have made us take him more seriously, but I don't think any other career would have changed how much we respected him. We may have driven him to give us the empty threat of a seating chart once in a while, but somehow we always managed to rein it in and regain his trust so that we could have the ability to sit wherever we wanted in class, another favorite part of Latin for most. Sitting with your friends always made class participation a little easier too. It was never fun to hear your Latin name get called out to answer a question in front of the class. In fact, the left-hand corner of the classroom that contained my friends and I prayed we would hear any name but our own. My name was Perpetua, and it was rare I knew the answer from pure knowledge of Latin. However, he purposely made most of those questions multiple choice, so either you knew it or had a 25% chance of getting it right. I would say I got pretty good at guessing from 4 choices over the years, but there was always the famous follow-up statement with the smirk. And why do you feel that is the answer? Sometimes I would respond with, well, it sounded like the best option to me, or it won when I played Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. But when I could give him a response that was backed up by evidence of me understanding the material, his face would light up. When we got a concept as a class, he would sometimes let out something I can really only describe as a joyful cry, which made us all die laughing. His flexibility with our rowdiness, never-ending patience, ability to rock a plaid skirt for any occasion he saw fit, awkwardly dancing at pep rallies for dignity, dry sense of humor that I will never forget, and the respect he had for each individual was what made Mr. Strauss, Mr. Strauss. He was one of a kind and made such a positive impact on my life. I also enjoyed watching him and Anne interact every day as their relationship was truly a treasure. The love they had for each other was undeniable, and there was nothing better than watching those two laugh together. And I truly feel blessed I was able to witness that. I wish I could tell him in person today just how much he meant to my peers and I, but instead I hope he is listening and looking down on us with his soft smile. Thank you for everything, Mr. Strauss. You will be dearly missed.
Okay, we're going to join and sing the Our Father together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In closing, again, thank you for celebrating as the Notre Dame Academy community the life of Stephen Strauss. Please note that your program contains Steve's chocolate cheesecake recipe, and I know personally it may be the best dessert I've ever had. I invite you to a reception in Fitzcommons following the service, We have a box with cards available and ask that you share your favorite memory of Steve Strauss for his family. Steve was a voracious reader, and we have placed his books on the tables for you to view. I'm also pleased to say that we have placed chainmail headpieces, which I had never seen before and are really cool, in Fitzcommons. And Steve made these by hand. And I even asked Anne earlier this week, didn't it just take days and days and days? And she said, I don't really know how long, because as she mentioned, he didn't sleep much, so who knows. But it looks very intricate to me, so. So those are in Fitzcommons. Steve made the headpieces, and they're quite interesting. Again, thank you for coming.